If I'm going to keep it a bean, the response to the Montgomery Brawl and the brick thrown at Roda Bashe perfectly encapsulate the disparity in actual protection between black men and black women. Welcome to another episode of Keepin It a Bean. If you are new here, my name is Marquise Davon. Keith, please don't ever call me Mark. If you are coming back here, welcome back. It's nice to see you. Keepin It a Bean is a podcast that focuses on having intentional conversation, hard conversations around pop culture, politics, social justice, and authentic storytelling. This is a space where I want you to be authentically yourself, so keep it a bean with who you are. And that's really what I want to push in my podcast and creating my community that been rocking with me for the last 6 years. You see me in a bunch of different iterations. So welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show. I appreciate y'all for always showing up. Tonight, I am sipping on some orange pico black tea. So that's what I got going on tonight. This tea helps reduce stress, anxiety, and blood pressure. That's what Google told me, so I'm gonna go with that being the truth. No, do your research. Actually know your research, okay? But also, thank you to those who left a review on Apple Podcast. And this one was from Avery. He said, my show is necessary, relevant, and now. This podcast is just so needed on multiple levels, and this review does not do it justice. If you want to support me in this podcast, a great opportunity to do so is by leaving a review or leaving a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening to these podcasts. It's going to be super important for me to show up on different playlists. It's important for me to be able to gain a new audience, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. But this is what is important for us as podcasters whenever we are doing our stuff. So please, thank you to those who decide to leave comments. Thank you to those who leave ratings. To keep doing the same thing over and over again. I appreciate you. Also, another way to support this here podcast, you can donate to my Patreon. So that's patreon.com/marquisedavon. That is MarquiseDavon. This is just a really dope opportunity for you to invest in me. This helps me with equipment. This helps me pay for my membership at Rec Philly. This also allows me to just be able to hire and create at larger rates, because ultimately I would love for my podcasting to be my full-time job, right? So give me that opportunity. Make sure you're investing in this content creator. On Patreon, you're going to see some old interviews that I have done with previous podcasts come back up. And that's what you're going to get on every single Sunday. Some stuff that I have that I'm bringing out of the archives, but also just another opportunity to see some behind the scenes work. And so I'm working on content that goes behind the scenes of the work that I do, how I strategize my content, and all of that good stuff. So please make sure that you are also investing in Patreon for as little as $2 a month, which is $24 a year. And that's significantly cheaper than your Netflix payments, okay? Any streaming service you got, besides Tubi, you know that John free. But everything else, help a brother out, please and thank you. Nah, but seriously, if you find my content worthy, if you know you're also learning something from my content, please make sure that you use this as an opportunity to subscribe and also invest in the work so I can continue to just do more work. If there are other ways to also invest in me, that means letting people know about the work that I do. Tell a friend to tell a friend. That is beautiful when I hear people say, yo, I referred your podcast to X, Y, and Z. That's going to be super important as you go along and as I continue to build this audience. Or if you want me to talk at your school or do a workshop, I've done stuff around SEL, Black masculinity. I run a backwards design workshop for creatives and small business owners as well. So if you're all interested in that, feel free to shoot me an email, slide into my DMs, tell somebody that got the funds that may need some of my services, let them know as well. So this is just a really good opportunity. So again, that's all the good stuff. That is, me, my administrative work that I do with the podcast. Now, let's honestly get into the episode. And before we fully get into this episode, I just want to do some level setting. You already know how I get. The first thing to worry about when we do some level setting, this is not a video on man bashing or a niggas ain't kind of video at all, yada, yada, all that good stuff. That is not what this video is about at all. This is a video that shows my observations about public discourse, digital and in real life, and what I've observed and how Black people responded to the protection of a Black man, so in Montgomery, or the protection or lack thereof of Black women when we looked at the brick being thrown, right? And so this episode is really going to just go through some of the things that I have observed and how we could potentially do a little bit better in showing up for each other as a community as a whole, right? But first and foremost, we got to look at Black people's response to violence in general, right? We got to look at how we are all showing up for each other. And there is a gender disparity that I have noticed throughout my existence, to be honest. And so if I'm looking at somebody like a Sandra Bland, when people saw what happened to Sandra Bland, it immediately was like, well, she had an attitude problem. She shouldn't have done this. She should have talked to the cop a little bit better. She shouldn't have done X, Y, and Z. It's always a woulda, coulda, shoulda. We're always telling Black women what to do in that regard, right? We also look at somebody like Megan Thee Stallion. She also went through a very similar thing where she experienced violence, but once again, they were able to question if she was worthy of protection, if she was actually shot, were we going to be placating X, Y, and Z? And so when you look at any social media figure and content creators just in general, for Black women in particular, if they have a strong feminist politics, womanist politic, then they tend to experience a little bit more scrutiny online and lack of protection because they have a critical approach of how they are talking around patriarchy, talking about men, masculinity, and all of that stuff, right? And then on the flip side, we also experience the violence of witnessing Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, George Floyd, and also recognizing that throughout their murders, movements were built out of them, right? Now, I ain't gonna hold because people also question, okay? They question if they were perfect victims or not too. And so that's conservatives from across the board. So there almost feels like there's a questioning of any violence that happens towards Black people because that's what America is designed to do, right? We don't have to care about Black people. We don't have to care about how we react to the violence towards them because that's something that Black people have just brought on themselves. And so as we get into the conversation today, I want to unpack a little bit more of that because both groups of Black people, and I'm speaking in a binary today, so I want people to just understand that, these groups of Black people experience violence, but it may come in two different forms. And so when we experience Black men experiencing violence, a lot of the time we're talking around the systemic violence that Black men are experiencing overtly and what tends to be covered in the media versus where Black women may experience more interpersonal violence at higher rates. And so that's coming from within the community, that's coming from within their partnerships and who they choose to partner with, right? And so these are going to be important as we talk around the Montgomery Brawl and then what also happened to the woman who had a brick thrown at her head, right? And also what we are looking at are the responses that we had to this, right? And so that's the piece that I really want us to really lean into a little bit more. And for everybody, from an educational tip, we got to hop into that piece too. It's important to recognize that the ways in which individuals react to violence is based on gender and race. And that can vary due to a different combination of factors, right? It could be societal expectations, it could be cultural norms, historical context, or personal experience, right? All of these factors talk around how we react to seeing somebody experiencing violence, somebody experiencing harm. These factors also can greatly influence how individuals perceive and respond to the violence, leading to different reactions based on gender and race. Again, we are talking about violence against Black people, Black men, Black women, Black femmes. And gender also plays a significant role in shaping our reactions to violence. Societal expectations and stereotypes about masculinity and femininity can also influence how violence is perceived and responded to. For example, societal norms often dictate that men should be strong, assertive, and able to protect themselves and others. As a result, violence against men can be seen as a threat to their masculinity and social expectations, which leads to a more intense reaction as we talk about this. Then, on the other hand, societal expectations and stereotypes about femininity often emphasizes traits such as passivity, nurturing, or submissiveness. This could result in violence against women being downplayed or dismissed, with victims being blamed or scrutinized for the behaviors or choices. The perception that women are more vulnerable or weaker can also lead to a lack of support and resources for women who experience violence. Now, we're talking about this from a very binary standpoint, but when you add in that layer of race, then we have to take it from an intersectional standpoint. Intersectionality is a moment where two intersecting oppressed identities, marginalized identities, are also experiencing harm at the same time, right? So being Black can be a marginalized identity, but being man is a privileged identity. But being black and being woman, those are two marginalized identities that they may experience gender-based violence, but they're also experiencing race-based violence. I hope that makes sense for my listeners. Again, I got the most thoughtful community out here, so I know y'all know what it is, but that's for anybody who's coming in at different points too. So off rip, let's talk about what happened in Montgomery and how we reacted to it. So a security guard was being jumped by a group of white people, and ultimately, and I'm just making a long story less long, he was saved by a large amount of black men, which resulted in the Montgomery Brawl. We all look at Montgomery and we're like, August 5th, that's a holiday. We all going to just see what's going on down there, right? And so as we are looking at this event, we're seeing this black man experience violence from white people, but everybody, niggas is running across the dock. People are jumping off of boats and swimming. People are cheering. There is a visceral reaction to black people. We're defending ourselves. And so all of us are just like, yes, this is the type of energy that we need. This is everything that's going on. And so as I'm witnessing this, my personal response to the video was excitement. I said, yup, get him, knock him out, period. I had excitement. I had joy. There was a experience of resistance. And I was like, if we are also going to be dealing with this consistent violence on a regular basis, make sure we get our licks in too. I believe in nonviolence with those who are nonviolent with us. You already know what Malcolm X says, but I will be violent with those who are violent with us. And that's the reality. And that's what we kind of witnessed, right? And I'm also looking at the reaction on social media. On social media, we're also seeing August 5th is a holiday. Everybody is providing protection with chairs at this point. People are making jokes, making memes, but also there's like a seriousness about it that kind of observed how white people act. White people even got in on the joke. And to me, I'm just like, this is an interesting response that we're seeing because even white people are aware of their BS, but black folks are also aware of it too, right? Because we're at the end of the violence most times. And then I'm also seeing like black men experiencing a form of protection. Now, at this point, social media is a space where we have the manosphere, we have the black manosphere, we have black male studies scholars and all of that stuff, right? So there is this air on social media that black men are not protected. Black men are always being critiqued and yelled at, and we're pathologizing their experience, our experience. And so there's no space for grace when it comes to black men at all, right? And so I want us to like lean into this because this is also why I talked around the initial examples, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, not Freddie Gray, but Freddie Gray as well, and George Floyd. There is an air of like black men must be the mantle and must be the example, and almost like they are going to be the face of the movement. They are going to be the priority when it comes to who do we need to make change for. So if we look at something like Black Lives Matter, they are primarily centering black men in how they are approaching anything. And those are the people who are getting the most amount of attention. I'm not saying they are denying women or femmes, but they do understand that optics, everybody buys into like, how can we protect the black man, right? And so I think that's important for us to put together because what happened in Montgomery is also indicative of the kind of violence that black men face, right? We're talking about the systemic violence that black men are facing and how we are the ones in public discourse and we have higher media representation in terms of like who is systemically oppressed, how is mass incarceration impacting black men, X, Y, and Z. That's going to be important because this relates to black men's experience in terms of violence. Violence perpetrated by the law enforcement, black men often have been the focus of attention due to cases of police brutality and racial profiling. We all know how that goes down, right? And so when I look at what happened in Montgomery, those white people are the system. They are the beneficiaries of the system. And so they have been attacking this one black man, and we were able to fight back. And so I think there's a rallying between that because as black people, we can all be frustrated with the exact same thing. There is a racial solidarity in how we are frustrated around white supremacy and being attacked and all of that. It's also important to acknowledge that black women also experience violence and mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement, although their experience may not receive the same level of visibility and attention. That piece is also going to be important. What I noticed on social media is that we were all able to get behind what was going on and want to protect this black man because of, right? Because of all of us as Black people have experienced harm. We have all have a certain level of rage and emotional catharsis that comes along with, I'm gonna get my lick back. I'm gonna hit them too. And so that's gonna be important as we continue to have this conversation. I wanted to, again, talk around how social media and how people responded to the Montgomery brawl, and then what happened to Roda Bashe. Roda Bashe posted a viral video on social media that documented her allegedly being hit by a brick after she refused to give a man her number. That's important to know, right? Because as I'm looking at this piece now, we're seeing this Black woman talk around like, yo, I was just hit by a brick and nobody did anything. Nobody moved. Black men are all around. She switched the camera around. Nobody was there to protect her, right? That's a stark difference to what we just witnessed last month at the beginning of August. Everybody ran to protect this Black man. Everybody ran and was in support. But as we look at social media, it switched. And it's hard to believe that everybody's looking out for everybody when you see this kind of thing go on, right? Because I even look at my response. I was angry. I was frustrated. But I essentially had like a public quietness about it too, right? I retweeted a couple things. I may have like reposted some other people's thoughts on it just because I was like, all right, somebody else is going to talk about this. You understand what my politic is. So I don't feel the need to have to add on to it. But it was sitting with me for a little bit because at this point now, I'm sick to my stomach and I'm frustrated because it almost feels like this bystander effect. It almost feels like everybody's immediate thing was to, well, that's not my business. That's not my business, right? Because that to me is a little bit of a disconnect because we were all able to understand it was everybody's business when this Black man was being jumped by all these white people. But now when we have to turn and look in on ourselves, it's a little bit different. And so what I witnessed on social media was there's an initial rallying cry behind like, we need to make sure she's good. This is messed up, X, Y, and Z. But then it moved to blaming her. She was being vilified straight on social media across the board. People were finding reasons to deny her experience. Some people were looking for reasons to justify the violence against her. And others were expressing their own experiences around protecting themselves from men and having to do a very similar thing. And so I'm also thinking about this in the conversation now because as I'm witnessing social media, everybody's like, well, nah, she bashes men. Oh, nah, she doesn't even like our own community. Oh, it's just that and the third. And I'm just like, y'all, just because she has a strong politic on her feminism, on how she looks at masculinity, how she looks at manhood, that does not mean she is supposed to experience violence. A critique is going to happen. Her personal experience. And for me, it was just something that rang true because of my own experience hearing my mom tell a story around one of her friends who decided to reject a man in public. And when they were out in public, she was like, nah, I'm not with this. And so he ended up shooting her. And so at that point, I was just like, oh. But my mom was just like, what he had said to her was, if I can't have you, nobody can. You're not going to embarrass me, X, Y, and Z. And so when I looked at this story and saw what happened to Roda Bashe, I'm sitting there, I'm just like, not much has changed. Like hearing my mom's story from back in the day and then seeing what happened today and then also just seeing these disparities. This is important because Black women in particular experience higher rates of intimate partner violence compared to women of other and racial and ethnic groups. Black women are facing it at higher proportions. They're also more likely to be victims of assault and homicide compared to women of other races. Black women also face specific challenges in accessing support services and resources due to systemic barriers and intersectional discrimination. That is the historical information. That is the examples that we see countless and stories that we hear countless over and over and over again. And so when we're engaging in any of these conversations, it's important for us to recognize like the societal expectations that we have in terms of how we are discussing men and women, Black men and Black women, and how we are experiencing violence, but also our reactions to that violence. So we're experiencing frustration, we're experiencing violence, we're experiencing this. But when we look at the stark differences on social media, again, I want us to understand everybody has dealt with violence. However, what we have seen and what I have seen was a big disappointment in terms of like how we showed up for the security guard versus how we showed up for Roda Bashe. And that to me signals everything we need to know around who we say is worthy of protection. Black men are worthy of protection, right? Public protection. Because I know we have experienced our personal harms. We have all been harmed by somebody. Somebody is the villain in our story. I have a villain in my story, right? In terms of how I developed, the harm that I experienced growing up, the harm that I experienced in a regular day, whether it's from personal connections or if it's from the state. And I think for me, as I watch how other men decided to minimize the harm that Ro went through, I think that for me spoke a little bit more. And this is when I decided I wanted to have this conversation, but more so just think around the ways in which that we're showing up for each other. Thinking around the ways that we are showing empathy, basic human decency. I don't think anybody deserves to be harmed. I don't think anybody deserves to have a big brick thrown at them, getting jumped by white people, any of this stuff. However, as I am looking and as I am watching, I am concerned around the fact that people want Black women to take an L. There is a comfort in this, and I think it is something that's a little deeply rooted in how we want revenge. There's a space there is deeply rooted in we experienced as men, some of our first experience with harm may have been from a woman, may have been from an older person, may have been from a relative, whatever the case may be. And some of it is like we're desensitized to the violence that women are also facing, right? Because they have to deal with it from all fronts. And some of us have to reckon with our own violence that we have committed towards women. And I think that's an uncomfortable truth for a lot of us to have to deal with. And so when I saw the outright wanting to protect the Black man, but everybody questioning or trivializing the violence that happened against a Black woman, and she's not the first. We make jokes around people's stuff all the time. We make jokes around Tina Turner. We witnessed what happened to Mary. We witnessed what happened to Megan Thee Stallion. We witnessed this to plenty of women in our lives, but oftentimes what happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. I worry that at times that we engage in these conversations, it's not fully understanding what we have personally been through, why we are reacting the way that we are, and how we should be challenging each other. As men, I want us to be better around not allowing this to happen. Some of it I do. I'll say I'm okay with street justice. Okay, I am okay with street justice. I am okay with us having to just check each other, no matter what that looks like. But as long as we send a signal that hitting women, hitting children, hitting each other is not okay. We need to hit a critical mass of like us not wanting to do this to each other anymore or bear witness to this, because I did find a little bit of hope when I saw what happened in Montgomery and seeing how we can rally for each other. We do know how to defend each other. But it's a scary thing when we have to look at each other, right? Because we have all experienced different spaces in terms of I need to protect my own, but also I have like the societal pressure of how I need to be showing up. But also at the exact same time, there is a space where it's not my business, because suddenly it was nobody's business. And I think that's the part that's hard. And so when we have this conversation, I utilize the examples because those were most relevant at the time, but it's a tale Otis time, right? However, it is crucial for us to understand and address the disparities in reactions to violence based on gender and race. This requires us to challenge the societal norms, stereotypes, and also advocate for equal protection and support all individuals regardless of gender. And we need to promote a little bit more intersectional approaches to addressing violence. We need to acknowledge and address these disparities. We can also work towards creating a more just and equitable society for all. I wrote that. Let's get with it. Let's get it. Okay. But for real, I want us to really lean into displaying a little bit more empathy for each other. I want us to really lean into being a little bit more intentional with how we are reacting and internalizing why we are reacting the way that we are. That will help us be able to challenge. It helps us to look at data. It helps us to look at when to check each other, right? That's scary because some of us are just like, yeah, if we were to do this, then what could happen to me? There's a space where people don't feel protected. There's a space where people don't feel safe. There's a space where people don't feel validated. But the same ways that everybody else trivializes our own experience with harm and violence is the same thing that we did to our own. And that's not fair. So I hope when you listen to this episode that you have an opportunity to just take time to think around your own relationship to violence, your own relationship to Black men who experience violence, Black women or femme who experience violence, and are you contributing to it? Are you staying silent? Are you not checking your boys? Are we not engaging in these critical conversations? Because if we continue to react this way, younger folks are going to be able to engage with it and see how we are acting, and I don't think that's fair. That is just telling them that this violence is okay. We cannot tell young people that, because that's just going to perpetuate the cycle of harm and violence. And us as a community, we are experiencing so much harm from the rest of the world. What does it look like when we begin to push a certain standard? What does it look like when we are now saying, nah, what's going on in the social contract is very different? And so I want us as a community to really think around how can I show up just a little bit better? How can I ensure that the next generation doesn't have to deal with this? Because if I'm gonna keep it a bean, once we get in alignment on that, I think we're gonna be a lot better as a people. I think we're gonna be able to challenge each other more, build intentional community, and be better. So that's another episode of Keeping It a Bean with Keith. I appreciate those who listened in. I'll make sure to drop some articles and resources down in the description box below as well. Please make sure that you tell a friend to tell a friend. This conversation is super important. Please be better to each other. Thank you so much for another episode. I will see you next week. Peace.